Hello, this is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter, coming to you from the wild and woolly Rogue River Valley in Southern Oregon with the Secret of Light group. We're here with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, bringing all knowing and knowledge into our being, just as Walter Russell discusses in his book, The Secret of Light. Today, we're going to actually begin to wrap up quite a bit of things. We're going to tie together both the concepts of Walter Russell and those of Ibrahim Karim, who is the founder of biogeometry. It was very interesting. Some of you have been probably watching some of the videos that we've been doing on Walter Russell, and maybe some of the ones I've been doing personally on biogeometry. And some of the ones we did, like on the archetypal ruler, that a lot of people have been very interested in and been watching that. But last couple of weeks ago, we talked about the universal octave and how color and sound all work together, and how the notes and light and even the inert or noble gases are all the same, and they all resonate on the same level. Within biogeometry, Ibrahim Karim has actually that same cosmology, that same theory, and his tools are actually meant to measure those. And that is what we are going to call, or what Ibrahim Karim calls, the physics of quality. I know that we talked about the physics of quality a bit, and I know Doug actually still maybe didn't quite understand it and had some more questions. So we're going to try to cover those today for you, Doug, and really kind of bring these two concepts together of, Walter Russell was around in the early 20s all the way up until I think the 50s when he passed away. And then, Ibrahim Karim is around today. So he's picked that up. So if you look at the screen here, I've kind of put together a collage of some of the ideas that we're going to talk about today. So as we see here, we see Walter Russell over in the left-hand upper corner. He worked with Westinghouse, and he was very big in transmutation. And that's also the concept of biogeometry. Within biogeometry, the idea, it's not like a war mentality where we're going to go and we're going to stop everything. And the idea behind biogeometry is you don't try to negate a detrimental force, you try to transmute it. And what that means is the force will stay in place, but you're transmuting its resonance from a detrimental influence to a positive influence on the body and on the environment. So even Walter Russell, within his ideas, he talks about the transmutation. He also talks about the creation, right? That all things are created in the wave. But when you transmute, you take a creation and you change it. So the difference between transmutation and creation is something's already been created and we're just changing its form to become more beneficial for the environment and for the humans. So let's go back to the screen here that we're looking at. So, we're going to talk about biogeometry. We're going to talk about Walter Russell. We're going to talk about transmutation, and we're going to talk about the physics of quality. Down in the middle of the screen here, there's a book here that Ibrahim Karim wrote. And you can see here, there's a picture of Ibrahim with his daughter. So his daughter's below. This is Dorea. She's the one who's actually leading a lot of the courses now for Dr. Karim. And here's Ibrahim Karim. And Dorea here is wearing their pendant that they have, which actually has a lot of these forms on it. And we're going to talk a bit about those forms and why they may, and the theory behind why they're shaped the way they're shaped. So within that, Dr. Karim wrote a book called Back to a Future for Mankind. And I think this was written somewhere around 2015 or 16, somewhere in there. Because I know I took his classes in 2018.
You had a class here in the States?
Yeah, well, he has an associate named Dr. Robert Gilbert out of Asheville, North Carolina, who is one of the only sanctioned teachers in the United States.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere about
that.
that.
And Dr. Gilbert came to Palo Alto, and when I was living in Silicon Valley, he actually they had the class in Palo Alto. Since then, at that time, there was no online courses. With the pandemic and so on, they have gone to mostly all online courses now. And if you go to biogeometry.com, you can sign up for the courses there. There's an advanced class, and then there's a fundamentals class and advanced class. Most of the stuff that we talk about here is in the advanced class, but again, everything that we're going to talk about today is pretty much from his website and from what I've learned and from what we've learned from Walter Russell. So here's Ibrahim and his daughter in the book Biogeometry. I'd recommend that anyone who's interested to read the book.
It's fantastic. Yes.
And this is a picture of Salvador Dali in the corner. And the reason I have him on here is because we're going to talk a little bit about the mean, the golden mean, golden ratio. And Salvador Dali was a very big proponent of everything that he produced was based on the golden mean and on ratios, and was very futuristic in his concepts.
Looks
and
like
this,
LSD to me.
Well, that's if you ever look at any Dali's work, it is rather out there. I mean, it has all kinds of things going on. And then this is just a actual staircase in the Louvre that is based upon the golden mean, also on the golden ratio. So
B3 is B3 related to this?
You mean BG3?
I guess, yes.
Yes, BG3. We're going to talk about that today too, and we're going to explain that a little bit better. So, and if some people have actually watched my last video on my Eagle Medicine Ranch property, where I went out and actually located the BG3 power spots on that property, that's what we're talking about today, is why and how we can actually locate those, and why and how Ibrahim Karim developed the tools to do that. So any questions before we start today from our group?
How does the word harmonize relate to what you just said with with the dealing with the different frequencies?
Well, we'd call it probably more resonance, right? And so you want to bring vibrational qualities into a resonance, and then you want to transmute those to actually become a beneficial wave. So a wave will have a quality, as we're going to talk about here, the quality of physics, the quality of the energy, right? Because it is light, it is energy. And that energy can either be beneficial or detrimental. And again, it's beneficial or detrimental to humans and to organic material, right? Is what we're talking about here. So when you harmonize, you're actually, you can use that term to say that you're trying to bring both those into a resonance that are going to resonate together to form a new wave that would then change its waveform. And then we're going to talk about that as we get into waveform and waveform mechanics. So what this is where Walter talks about the wave, Ibrahim actually drills down more into its form and what makes that form beneficial or detrimental. All right, so let's get started. So the physics of quality, a label coined by Professor Dr. Ibrahim Karim, is a science that deals with the qualitative. And I've gone through, how I do sometimes. I'm kind of like a little bit of a wordsmith here, that I like to drill these concepts into everybody, so that when they see this, that they were talking about the qualitative aspects. We're not talking about the quantitative, which is the amount and so on. We're talking about the qualitative aspects. So this was a term that was coined by Dr. Karim with the qualitative relationships between energy systems. This is the qualitative effect that an energy system has one on the other. So when we talk about energy systems, we can also impose the word wave. So a wave is an energy, right? And this is what we're talking about. So a detrimental energy may be a 5G. What energy could you introduce to a 5G wave to change its form, to transmute it, to form transmutation, to now create that into a positive form? Or even say, like with orgone, right? What is orgone doing to negative influences in the environment that is going to change it into a beneficial form? So when two wavelengths enter into resonance, this is what we talked about a little bit. We talked about harmonize or harmonics, Doug. The resulting wave takes the shape produced by the superposition of the two original waves. So as these two waves meet, they are going to merge, in a sense, harmonize, and form a new waveform. A quantitative change takes place and can be seen in the change of the wavelengths and amplitudes. So if we just want to look a little bit here at over here on the side, and we see that these waves over on the right-hand side, we see that if we go in the horizontal direction, that is the wavelength. So a wave can have a shorter wavelength or a longer wavelength. The amplitude is the top and the bottom, so the apex and the trough. So when we think about, the amplitude, if we put a rope and tie it off to, a tree, and we, shake it up and down, that movement, that up and down, is what we call the amplitude. And the amplitude can change, but the force that runs through the middle is what Walter would call the dynamic axis, would stay the same, but the amplitude can go up and down. So there's another aspect of electromagnetic radiation. So Walter Russell would not call electromagnetic. He'd just say it's electric, which has a major influence on how the waves affect us. Again, so as we talk about this, think about the idea of a 5G wave and how they affect us. Measurements have shown that the quality of the effect, which is the way it influences biological energy systems. So we have a wave out there, and how is it going to affect ourselves? We're the biological energy system, or a tree, or whatever that is in organic form, is based on the relationship between the amplitude and the wave and its wavelength. So the form, so let's think about the form of the wave, right? It has a length and it has an amplitude. That form, based on how it's structured, is what determines the effect it would have on biological systems. This proportional relationship, so a proportional relationship is, the height to the length, right? So like if you have, a three, like within an isosceles triangle, you have certain relationships and so on, a right triangle, that proportional relationship is the main criteria that gives the wave its quality. So it's a proportional relationship of the amplitude to its length, right? That is going to give the wave its quality, not its quantity, right? It might be a very forceful wave, but that doesn't have to do anything with the quality. It's its length to its amplitude. The wavelength in itself is not the decisive factor, nor is the amplitude. Proportions express a relationship and are a main criterion of quality. We can then deduce that any wavelength can manifest any quality depending on the amplitude, and also that any amplitude can also manifest any quality depending on wavelength. So by adjusting the amplitude and the wavelength, we can actually we can transmute the quality of that waveform. We can do, okay. Proportions determine angles, and in turn, angles are the components of shape. So as we talk a bit about this, we're going to talk a little bit about, as we have a angle here, as we have a let me actually add a little bit of this. See if I can change my pointer. Can you guys see my pointer? Is it still pretty small?
No, I don't see it.
Okay, let me make it a little bit bigger here. All right, let's see here. There we go. So as we talk about, the wavelength and so on, this is really what Russell gets into. Russell does not get into the actual quality of the wave. He just talks about that all things are waves. And, that is in the main premise of most of what Walter Russell discusses. Okay, now can you guys see that on my screen? Can you guys see the mouse now on my screen?
A little bit. Yes.
Okay. So as we talk about, so this is what we would consider the wavelength, right? And this is what Walter Russell calls the dynamic axis. And then so the height from apex to trough is the amplitude. And this angle right here of this wave here is what determines its quality. And that's a ratio, right? To height versus the length.
So it's both things together, though.
Both
not
things,
just one of them.
yeah, it's both things together, but we can affect one or the other, therefore affecting the proportion or ratio, correct? We can change the length, which is going to affect, you know, the proportion, or we can change the height, which is going to affect the proportions. Those two factors. So we can adjust the wave by changing any of those. So so it is actually the shape of the wave that determines its quality effect. This is expressed in the proportions of amplitude to wavelength or as an angular relationship. The quality produced can then be measured according to quality scales, as in several methods of scientific radiesthesia. So again, the idea of radiesthesia is the use of pendulums to detect waveforms. Now we can detect waveforms with other radiesthesic type action. The difference between the radiesthesia and say dowsing, where you use rods, you don't, when you dowse, you're asking a question of the dowsing rod. And it's what we call mental dowsing. We've talked about this quite a bit. So when you do a mental dowsing exercise, and I've shown it quite a bit, you can do it with a neutral pendulum, where I can say, you know, my shirt is green and it's going to move back and forth this way, which is a no. I say my shirt is black and it moves backwards and forwards, which means that's the correct answer. That is a mental dowsing exercise because you're asking a question and you're getting a response from whatever method you're using. With radiesthesia, you're actually the antenna and you're picking up these waveforms through using different devices that we're going to talk about here in a bit. You know, we talked about it. We're going to talk about using this pendulum here, which is the BG3 pendulum, or you can use other pendulums like the horizontal pendulum here to test for color alone. The BG3 pendulum is made to pick up the three colors that we are going to talk about here. So radiesthesia was developed by some French monks, I believe, and then it was picked up by some people later on who began to develop in greater detail. And those fellows actually wrote quite a bit of books, and they were in France. And I believe I told the story about how Ibrahim Karim showed up at their house because he wanted to get more information from him, and an older woman answered the door, and she said, "Are you the Egyptian?" And he said, "Yes." And she said, "I've been waiting for you." And she gave him all the work of these two fellows that we're going to talk about here in a minute, on all the work they had done in the radiesthesia. So that is what the difference. Any questions on the difference between radiesthesia and mental dowsing? Or is that pretty clear for everybody?
William,
Yes.
when you were showing the different pendulum,
Mm-hmm.
because you've got the focus on the slide.
Mm-hmm.
When you're showing it, we can't really see it in the video. Like if somebody watches this, like if you put yourself more in focus and actually show the pendulum, we could see the difference between the three that you were showing. That's
Okay.
all.
Well,
Because that's been commented before in another video.
okay.
Somebody was talking to me. They said they can't see what they are. Okay.
Okay.
So the one, yeah.
So this right here, this one is the BG3 pendulum.
Uh-huh.
This is what we call the horizontal pendulum. And then this is what we call the vertical pendulum. Okay, so the vertical pendulum is actually tested for detrimental waves. The horizontal is actually what we use for the beneficial waves. And then the neutral pendulum here is just to test it depends on what you're testing for. You can use it for mental dowsing, or you can use it for things that are beneficial or detrimental based upon what you're looking for. So it has lots of uses. And the BG3 pendulum is designed to pick up the three qualities that we're going to mention here in a moment.
It's 4 different pendulums.
There's more. There's this one too. There's quite a few different. This is called the Waj pendulum. This is really an Egyptian pendulum, which you can do quite a few other things with. You can do time travel and different things with this one that I'll get into in later discussions once we begin to understand waveforms more. Okay.
Wow. So it doesn't come in a set with that other one though, the round one.
No, they're all separate. I have a larger Waj than I do my BG3 because I thought it was cool to have the bigger one, but bigger is not always better when you have to hold it all day. So sometimes it's better to get the smaller ones, spend less money, and they're easier to handle and not quite so heavy as you're using them over a long period of time. So
what do you call that round one? That's the neutral?
The ball is called the neutral pendulum, yes.
Okay.
From this analysis, it is impossible to change, and Abraham's website, he just has change. I'm putting in the term transmute, right? Because we're changing it from one thing to another, and that's really what I want to. I mean, what I'm trying to focus on in this channel and with this group also is the idea that we have the ability to transmute detrimental energies. We as master divine beings have that ability. It's just that we have to know the process. And there's many different processes to transmute different energies based upon the energy types you're looking at. So right now we're talking about in the 3D realm, right? We're talking about transmuting in the 3D realm. So we're transmuting the effect of energy systems such as electrosmog or the harmful effects of any material by changes to its wavelength or amplitude, whichever is more feasible. So if it's easier to change the length, we'll change the length. If it's easier to change the amplitude, we'll change the amplitude. But what we want to change is the ratio, right? This ratio between, which would be the hypotenuse of the triangle, right? By adjusting, the length or the height is going to change the length and the angle of that hypotenuse of that triangle. So since it is the shape of the wave that determines its quality, then it is through the resonance between similar shapes, as dealt with in biogeometry, that the universal multidimensional communication of quality occurs. So this, within biogeometry, it does not just affect our 3D realm. It is multidimensional. And we can affect, just as what the Hermetics say, as above, so below. But I'm almost of the opinion that there is no above and below. It's all the same plane. It's all happening at the same time. It's just different dimensions, right? And parallel dimensions in a sense. That we can affect the quality of these waves in different dimensions. And we're going to get into those dimensions and get into how things are affected in those dimensions in a minute here. The biogeometry system of scientific radiesthesia uses the principles of shape in its measurement devices in the shapes of pendulums, calibrated through geometrically polarized angles on vertical and horizontal discs. So again, vertical and horizontal discs, right? This vertical pendulum has the vertical disc, right? The disc is standing up, right? So the disc is vertical, right? Within the vertical pendulum. You guys see that? So now when I hold this pendulum up, you can't see the disc. Why? Because the disc is horizontal. The disc is here. So as you hold this disc is horizontal, correct? It's in the horizontal plane. This has two discs in the vertical plane. This is the vertical pendulum.
How is that vertical on the side? It looks like that one's on the horizontal plane.
Which way is this? Which way is this pointing this way? Is this vertical or horizontal, Doug?
Well, it's vertical, no?
Yeah, and that's where the discs are on the vertical plane. Right, they're sitting on a vertical plane this way. Horizontal's this way, right?
Yeah, that's why I thought the two flat sides.
No,
and
this is,
then-
so the horizontal's on top of here,
Got you.
right? So the discs have a secondary color calibration to express the qualities of proportion and angles in an abstract radiesthetic color quality scale applied to all ranges of the electromagnetic spectrum beyond the color ranges. This is pure measure of the quality produced by the shape of the wave, irrelevant of the wavelength or amplitude. In order to enable the detection of a specific object as the quality of a specific wavelength or its harmonics, a calibration is made on the pendulum string chain. There is a range different pendulums and measurement rulers in the biogeometry system, starting from the simple devices to more elaborate ones to be used in different levels of research and detection. So with all that being said, what it means is that there are different shapes, right, of these pendulums that are used to explore different areas and detect different wave types. But what Ibrahim has done is he's created tools to actually measure the quality that Walter Russell talks about. There is no real, meter, electric type of meter. Like we can measure quantities with meters. We can measure how much or how strong a wave force is. We can actually measure pretty much what we'd probably call the horizontal axis of that wave, which is the force that's running through that. Meters will measure that. That was what we would call, empirical measurement. We can actually measure that, the size, the intensity and so on and so forth. We can tell you how high the wave is, those kind of things, but we can't really tell you the quality. We can't tell you the hypotenuse angle of that. We can just, what they do, like say if they're going to tell you that a 5G wave is bad, they'll put certain amounts of 5G to something, and then they'll set what they call an ISO standard, right? An industry standard that says when it gets to this quantitative level, it's harmful. But they can't tell you through a measurement of that it's harmful because its ratio is harmful. They have to do a test to see how much quantity something will have, and then they set and then they'll make a meter, and when it gets to that point, a red light will go off and say it's bad. But it's really based on that ISO standard. Not the meter is not really measuring if it's bad or good. It's just actually relating it to a standard once it gets to that certain quantitative level. So what Ibrahim Karim has done is he's actually said, we've created these different tools from the very simplest, which would, probably be, this one here, the neutral pendulum, to probably the vertical would be, I would have to say would probably be the most elaborate because it actually has the two dials and so on, right? This pendulum, again, so both of these pendulums are kind of like, they're set to certain qualities that you would find using the pendulums. So a BG3 is capturing, the higher harmonic of gold, the higher harmonic of ultraviolet, and then the BG, and then the what they call the negative green. So within that, that's what this is set up to do. That is capturing those resonances. So it's kind of like taking, this pendulum here and set it to all three of those. Actually, all the higher harmonic of gold actually has like yellow and I think orange or something to create the higher harmonic of gold. So there's actually 4 settings you would have to make on this and place it over something, or you could just use this one pendulum that already has it built in to detect the BG3, which is the Biogeometry 3, which is those 3 resonances that we talked about. Does that answer your question, Doug? Now I know you had that earlier about BG3.
I think.
Okay. Well, hopefully we'll talk about that a little bit more. So as we look over here on the other side, now can you guys see my arrow on your screens? Okay, so the following are some of the properties, proportions, and their effect according to the radiesthetic color quality scale. So violet has a 1:2 ratio, right? So that would mean that, you know, that the distance between the amplitude and the length is at a 1:2 ratio. Green is at a 1:4. Red is at a 1:8. Ultraviolet is at a 3:4. And BG3 is at a 5:8, which is equal to 625. And the golden ratio, or phi, is at 1.618. So the 625 and the 618 within the golden ratio is really what BG3 is kind of measuring. It's actually determining the golden ratio within the harmonic, within the waveform. Do people understand what I just said, or any clarification on that? Okay, so this golden ratio is, you know, what we get when we do, you know, this Fibonacci sequence here. And so we see the 5:8 here. Can everybody see the 5:8 there? So that 5:8 ratio is the same ratio as this 5:8 here. So within this, you know, golden ratio, we have the BG3. This is what you know, Ibrahim Karim has determined is and called the BG3 ratio, is this 5:8. And here's a little description that's taken off. So the golden ratio is also called the golden mean or the golden section. Other names include extreme and mean ratio, medial section, divine proportion, divine sections, golden proportion, golden cut, and golden number. So as we get into sacred geometries, and you know, a lot of this has the golden ratio built into it, because these ratios resonate with the human, with the biological systems, to create the most beneficial energies that are for us as humans, and as for the energies that are here on the earth in the 3 dimension. Any questions before I move on from this slide?
The thing, Ibrahim didn't invent this stuff. This is old stuff, right?
This is old stuff. What Ibrahim created was the tools, and you know, again, he didn't create. I mean, radiesthesia, the French and the, you know, people before, and even the, you know, they were called augurs in the Roman Church that would douse power spots. That they found that those staffs that the bishops carry in the Catholic Church would actually vibrate when they got around BG3 elements. And so that's how they would locate where the churches should go. By when they put that, it would go into resonance with the BG3. And then they could say, this is where we should build the church.
The ones with the pineal gland thing on them?
Correct. Very, and again, you know, Ibrahim's background is that his family's involved with antiquities in Egypt. And so a lot of this, you know, we see pictures of this Waj pendulum, you know, on the pyramids, within the pyramid spaces. So this is not new technology, it's very old technology, but it's really, you know, the idea that we now have tools which Ibrahim is creating to measure, you know, this idea of quality. As I said earlier, we have empiricism, which measures mostly, you know, the weight, you know, and so on, and the things that our senses can detect. I've spoken before about William James, who had the term radical empiricism. And what he was trying to express, and this was back in the late 1800s, I believe, was he was trying to say that we can't just base our scientific knowledge on strict interpretive empiricism. We need to have radical empiricism, which takes into account all these other factors of the stars and the galaxies, and, you know, our emotional bodies and our different bodies. We have to take all these things into consideration. And, that didn't fly over well because it really went into scientific materialism, which wants to negate and poo-poo and say, these things don't exist.
Yep.
But what's happening now, though, that is all boomeranging back, and they're saying, no, the observer has a great effect. That oftentimes things don't even come into reality until we put our attention on them.
But
So
science believes that. I mean,
well,
all the quantum tests they do when they put a person in the thing, how it changes.
I mean, yes, I mean, that is now where it's going, but that's, within the last, 30, 50 years, maybe, but that's still not what's being taught. It's known, but it's not what's being taught in most places, right? I mean, if you're an aware scientist and you're an aware physicist, you know that, but in most high school or junior high or, elementary school classes, that's not what you're being taught. No. So, but that's the current belief, and everybody's very much aware that is what's really happening. So what Ibrahim has done within biogeometry is created systems in which we can measure the quality. Any more questions before I move on?
Yeah, it sounds like these priests back in the day, they understood a lot of this stuff, but they certainly didn't talk about it in a sermon.
No.
Yep.
And again, knowledge is power, right? And if they know where the
Mhm.
power starts going, they know how things work. I mean, sometimes, and that's really what we see here is that, and that's what I'm trying to do, right? My mission, right? To get this out there, to try to make sense of it, because it's we spent 10 months on the secret of light, and only until the end did I really, start picking it up. I mean, I did a little bit early, and we're going to talk about the diagrams here, but it's material that's difficult to understand because we've had so many overlays put on us that don't make it understandable. It is so different from what we're taught that to actually, change our perception, right? To change our perception to actually see this. And that's why I kind of want to talk a little bit, there's a movie, which is one of my favorites, called The 13th Warrior. I don't know if anybody's ever watched that, with Antonio Banderas. He's a Muslim that gets he kind of shanghaied into a group of Vikings that have to go back to their old country because there's an evil there that shall not be mentioned that they have to combat. And they're trying to fight all these like creatures, right, with their swords, and they're trying to kill them, and they're all, Vikings, right? They just want to go out there and be Mars beings. They just want to go kill everything, right? And it's not working. And so they actually go to the seer, this old woman who's been there, for hundreds of years. Within Nordic culture, they had those seers, supposedly. And they come to her and they say, hey, what do we need to do? She says, maybe you're fighting in the wrong field. Slaughter them all you wish, it will do no good. You have to strike the root. So as we look at, the situations we're in today, are we fighting in the right field? And when I say field, I'm actually saying dimension, right? Are we fighting in the correct field of resonance? Because today we spend most of our time in the 3D field, which, from what Walter says, is the effect. And we cannot change anything by addressing the effect. We have to strike the cause or the root. So how do we strike the cause or the root to change the effect of the 3D? You can't do it. You can slaughter the 3D all you wish. It will do nothing. You have to change the root. You got to change the waveform.
It's exactly like allopathic medicine.
Correct. They look at the cause. They try to, they look at the effect, and they don't look at the cause. And this is the perception shift that we have to have. And that's what Walter Russell is trying to get across, is that we have to change our perception, right? It's a cinematographic projection. It's an illusion that we see. We have to understand what makes this work. We have to understand the basis of the wave. We have to understand how 3D reality is created. We have to understand how we have the subtle bodies. And these are, and this is what's going on today. I mean, don't give me, I'm not the only one talking about this, right? I'm one of many that talk about it. Ibrahim Karim talks about it. Walter Russell talked about it. William James talked about it. All those guys that back then talked about it. But we have to relearn it. We have to remember this now. So any more questions before I go on to the next slide? All right. So here we go. The quality change in wave pattern of electromagnetic radiation. The qualitative effects of electromagnetic waves are based on the relationship of the amplitude to wavelength. We talked about that, right? Any quality can be introduced into any frequency by changing the amplitude without changing the wavelength, and vice versa. Transmutation. The change, transmutation, of wave shape can be made on any subtle energy level, vital, emotional, mental, or spiritual. So again, what this is written by Ibrahim Karim. What he's saying is that this transmutation can take place on any level, not just the 3D level. It can take place on the vital, the emotional, the mental, or spiritual, or the physical. But again, if you're a follower of hermetics, right? As above, so below. When we affect anything in the above realms, it will be transmuted down. Higher subtle energy levels are not necessarily of electromagnetic nature and can be transcendental or multidimensional. So what are we saying here? Well, when we read Walter Russell, The Secret of Light, we're talking about the wave and light in a 3D dimension, which is our physical dimension, which is a dimension of polarity. Now, we can get into esotericism about polarity, which is good and evil, right and wrong, right? Positive, negative. It's often said that in spiritual realms, angels don't understand right and wrong. They just do. This is the difference with man. This is, often some people often say that the Bible, when it talks about the fall of man in Genesis, and it talks about where they say when Eve ate the apple, he now knows the difference between good and evil, right? He now knows the difference in polarity. Other beings, other spiritual beings may not know that difference. They don't act in that way. Again, I'm not saying that, everyone believes this. I'm just saying that that's what some people say, that spiritual beings don't have the idea of, they just do what source or God tells them. And to not do that is what they would consider evil. But they don't know why they're doing it. If God says do this, they just do it because that's what God says. But to not do it is a sin. But they don't have freedom of choice or freedom of will, as man does. So within our world, we have freedom of choice. We have polarity. We have good and evil. We have right and wrong. We have these concepts, but it may not originate in the spiritual realm. It originates in man's thinking, as Walter Russell says, right? In the polarity and the duality that exists in the 3D realm. So higher subtle energies levels are not necessarily of an electromagnetic and can be transcendental, multidimensional. The physical wave shape might not change, but on the higher levels, there occurs a shape change that affects the quality. So within that higher level, that shape change can occur. The biogeometry multidimensional wave model, so the idea within, Ibrahim Karim's biogeometry model includes all the higher planes at different angles between the orthogonal planes of electromagnetic waves. Any change in shape, wave amplitude, wavelength, proportion on any subtle plane, vital, emotional, or mental, will produce a quality change, a transmutation. So the idea is that we can affect all these different waveforms, even in these other planes, by addressing how the wave and how they interact. And when we look at the archetypal ruler, if you guys remember how we went through the different planes and we actually found where the issue existed in which plane of nature, and then we would correct that waveform within that plane of nature. And for those who are watching this and have not seen the archetypal ruler, I would suggest you watch that, and after maybe listening to this, you might watch it again, because you may get a greater understanding of what is going on as we use the archetypal ruler, which is a biogeometry tool. So the spiritual plane bisecting the orthogonal electromagnetic plane in 2 equal 45 degrees is always in perfect proportion, producing the spiritual energy balancing quality detected in biogeometry through 3 quality components referred to as BG3, which is the higher harmonic of gold, the higher harmonic of ultraviolet, and the horizontal negative green quality. So through the introduction and this balancing with BG3, we bring into harmony, as you asked earlier, Doug, or into balance, right, these wave qualities and these energies. This is the main factor producing the balancing or centering quality found at the center of the wave at the intersection of the wave's planes. So I'm going to try to make, have you go back a bit to some of the things we talked about. Remember how we looked at the waves throughout all of the secret of light. Do you remember as it crossed across the horizontal line, there was a dot, which we called the dot of rest, which was that centering point, right? So within that is that centering point within, Walter Russell's description of the wave. And that is this balancing effect. It is therefore understandable that the change, the transmutation, and the quality effect of the holistic wave shape of other energy systems, which in the biogeometry are always seen as living. Everything is living and alive within the bio energy system, might not be visible on the physical measurable wave pattern if the change is on a higher subtle energy plane. So we only see things that within our senses, within this 3D realm. This is where we get into the radical empiricism, right? These things that we can't see, that we can't measure within our physical senses. Do they exist? Ibrahim Karim says they do. Walter Russell says they do, right? And all throughout history, Pythagoras, who was a hermeticist, up until we got into scientific materialism heavily in the 1930s, or actually after World War II mostly, right? After we got out of to the 1940s, it was always believed that there was more things affecting us than just our reality. So the quality effect of other living energy systems is measured on the effect of the system by the use of different types of diagnostic instruments showing the change, the transmutation in body energy based on Chinese. So we're talking a bit here about the meridians and acupuncture and the energy, the qi and so on that we talk about within Chinese medicine. And some instruments of radiesthesia can also be used for the process of detection of change in quality. So you can use these instruments on the body to detect different changes in energy and different energy levels. I mean, I can take the neutral pendulum and just point at somebody, shock their chakras, and I can tell you which chakra is out of alignment just by looking with my neutral pendulum. And I can look at with my other pendulums also and come up with different diagnosis. Now, I'm not a doctor, so I'm not going to say that what I'm doing is correct or right. But I'm just saying that's what Ibrahim Karim teaches within his courses.
Not being a doctor is a better chance, it seems.
Well, I'm an energy hunter, right? So that's what I do. I hunt for energy. So I hunt for the flow of energy and the change and the transmutation of energies is what I do. So we're going to go a little bit over this, the pendulum and these different planes of nature is what Ibrahim Karim calls them. They're in theosophy. Some of them have a little bit different naming, but this is within the cosmology of biogeometry. So spherical shapes, so the neutral pendulum, which is a spherical shape, that resonates with the physical plane. Why? Because Earth's a sphere. All right, the physical plane. All right. Downward pointing objects resonate with the vitality level, the vital body, which is kind of like, you know, our chi, our prana, that kind of stuff that makes us vital, that makes us alive, that makes us, you know, animated. That's the vital body. The hemisphere dome resonates with the emotional plane. So that's our emotions, how we, you know, how we feel about something, you know, how we, what angers us. That's the dome. The flat disk resonates with the mental plane. Again, it's almost like a hard disk, right? Isn't that funny? Like in a computer, you have a hard disk, right? Not another shape. It's a hard disk. You know, if you, I don't know if you remember, Doug, but in the old days we had these big plastic disks, you know, the hard disks that we load up. You know.
Yeah, of course I do.
The inverted hemisphere resonates with the casual first spiritual level. So the inverted hemisphere. So, you know, here are these things, right? So here we have the disc. It can be a disc or it can be, you know, oblong, you know, as we talked about, elliptical. And this is what Walter Russell talks about too in the formation, right, of planets. They actually start out a bit elliptical and they will obligate in the other direction, but they will become more like an ellipse. And then here's the downward, you know, and they can, this vital physical can have different shapes. It just has to be like a downward pointing. And then we have the astral or emotional body here, right, which is the upward dome. It can actually also be an upward pointed pyramid in a sense. We have the discs as the mental plane. And each of these planes can, as they stack, can be like a seventh heaven or a seventh mental plane, right? So you can have a single mental plane, you can have a two mental plane, and so on and so forth. So they have different levels within each of these planes also. And then so when you have the downward facing dome or the downward facing, this is the spiritual level 1, the upward facing, like the obelisk that you see in Washington, D.C. and so on. This is spiritual level 2. And then you have the center, which is when you draw a circle, right? And you put a center in the middle. That is the highest spiritual level, which is also, as we talked about earlier, the symbol for Walmart. So we know that that is the spiritual center. There's a story that is talked about where the Pope called Leonardo da Vinci into to ask him about God and his beliefs. And the Pope said, "How do you know God?" And da Vinci said, "I can draw God." The Pope said, "How can you draw God?" And supposedly, da Vinci drew a perfect circle and put a dot in the middle and said, "That is God," which relates back to this idea of the spiritual center. And if you take a pendulum over a circle on a piece of paper, if you take the BG3 pendulum, it will begin to rotate in the center of that circle. Because
Just
that,
to draw a circle like with a pen?
yeah, exactly. Because that is where the BG3 will resonate from. So the center is a resonance within the higher spiritual plane. You can also take the BG3 pendulum and draw a line. And if, say, someone else draws a line, you can walk over that line and I can tell you where the starting point of that line is, because that's where the BG3 emanates also. So any questions before we move on from here? Anything about the planes of nature or the shapes or anything like that?
Well, the inverted hemisphere there,
Mm-hmm.
is that like the convex and the concave that we? So
Yes.
the inverted would be the convex?
Yeah, the inverted here would be this one here. So this is spiritual one here. So this would be
Yeah.
the pointing down.
Okay.
Which is also, it's kind of funny because, you know, sometimes this is considered the sign of male, right? And this is kind of the sign of female, right? Same, you know, the upward facing triangle and the downward facing triangle is often referred to as within male and female. Any more questions before we move on from this slide? All right. So we're going to get back into the relationship between angle and energy quality. Can easily be understood if we look at colorless light as it passes through a prism. It refracts into different angles, and we are able to perceive these angles of refractions due to different colors they produce. So, you know, here is the idea that we're talking about here. We have the sunlight as it comes through the prism. It can refract these colors, red, orange, yellow, green, indigo, blue, violet. So the red is a longer wavelength and the violet is a shorter wavelength. So, I don't know if anybody has ever used the EMF rocks that my friend Justin sells, but those rocks actually are a pink color, which has this red wave, which actually helps. That's one of the reasons that those rocks actually take the shorter waves, right, of the 5G and introduce a longer wave element to them when we have them around us, which would then make that wave more beneficial for us. So when we end up with reds and different colors of electromagnetic fields that we can introduce to actually transmute those negative wave fields. And as I don't know if you remember, but from I think it was 2 or 3 times ago, where we talked about the inert gases and we talked about spectral analysis. I think I am actually was talking about planets and how they can actually determine the planet composition from their spectral analysis. We're getting back into that as we put hydrogen through a prism. We get these colors that are put through where it's a higher resonance of red within the hydrogen. So in the early 1950s, French radiesthesia researchers, Chaumery, so these are the 2 guys that Ibrahim got his research from, his background information from. And one of these guys was actually found dead and mummified from using the vertical pendulum too much, from dealing with his vertical energy too much. From Chaumery and de Balizal, use color calibrating pendulums to detect the otherwise unperceived color energy quality distributed on a horizontal circle, which was directly related to position on the circle in the north on a sphere. However, they found that the color quality distribution is related to the angle of the sun's rays. So they took a circle like this and they brought in the rays, and they put this on a horizontal plane. It's down here in the lower right-hand corner of the slide. And as they did that, they found that these colors ended up, blue, indigo, violet to the east, right? And this is, oftentimes people will say that when you get up in the morning, it's the best time to meditate because that's when the ultraviolet and the violet rays are the strongest. And that's ultraviolet and violet is supposed to be the angelic realm. So sometimes in the morning when we meditate, when the sun first comes up, we have greater access to the angelic realm. So we have violet, ultraviolet, white. To the south, we have the negative green. And then we go black, infrared, red to the west, orange, yellow, and green to the north. Now, within that concept, they also showed that this is a spherical planet. So this would be the Earth here as a sphere. And as the sun comes down, the top would be green, and then these colors would be developed as they go around, just as on the horizontal, with the bottom of the Earth being the negative green color, which Ibrahim Karim talks about is that's why when we're in sleep, this is where we get the regenerative powers of the negative green. And this is why we actually regenerate in sleep and have the ability to heal and things as we sleep during the night.
Why is it on an angle like that?
That's the way you want to show it, I guess. I don't really know. I mean, so the biogeometry physics of quality is outlined in Dr. Karim's book, Back to the Future of Mankind. That was what I showed on that first slide. Differentiates between color and color quality, or qualitative color scale. Color refers to the perception in the visible range, while color quality refers to the same effect beyond that range. So what we're saying here is that these qualities that we talk about are beyond our perceivable range of color. So just because we see red doesn't mean that that is the quality of red. There is these qualities that can expand past our visible range of color. So not all, just because something's a certain color doesn't necessarily mean that it does have that range. This is the same as the repetitive effect of musical notes on string instruments. This is what we talked about with the universal harmonics, right? With the audible range that also extends beyond it, where we would have sound quality without actual sound. So this would be like for dogs or animals or bats that have a much greater hearing range than what we have. There are sound qualities. So just as within this 3D realm, there are aspects that we are aware of that we can't see, hear, taste, or touch or feel, but we know they're there. Just as there could be spiritual realms and all these other realms around us that we do not have the senses, right? We don't have the physical senses to actually pick up. So just as there are these qualities and energies that exist that we know of but can't see or touch without special instrumentation, there could be other planes, as in what Ibrahim Karim would say, there are other planes that we can't see, touch, because we don't have the instruments, but the biogeometry instruments allow us to do that. This applies to all sensory perception, which can be applied as qualities beyond their ranges. Whether we use color, sound, or touch in the qualitative scale, we are actually measuring an abstract effect beyond our sensory perceptions, making the sensory scales of color, sound, touch, or other completely intangible. While the concept of repetitive levels of the same quality is perceived in sound as octaves, this is what we talked about, universal octave. Remember how we talked about how these are repetitive as we go through the octaves and the scales. So anyone who's watching this video, if they they can watch the last two videos we did. One was on the inert gases and the other was on the universal octave, where we go into great detail explaining these concepts. While the concepts are the same quality, notes using color based on the same concepts, more practical in the calibration of pendulum-based instruments. So using color based on the same concept is more practical in the calibration of pendulum-based instruments. So what we're saying here is that these instruments, these pendulums that we've talked about, the horizontal pendulum and the vertical pendulum, right? The horizontal pendulum, this one, the downward facing one here, the little cone on the bottom, and the vertical one with the vertical discs. These are all based, if we look, I don't think you can see them. I don't think I can get close enough for you to see those.
Too close.
Is that too close? So if you look at the tops of these, they are basically these colors right here in this order. So on these discs are these colors in that order. So what Ibrahim has done in order to set like a standard, right? A somewhat of an ISO for how we're going to measure these qualities, he said, let's take the color scale, and that will be the standard scale in which we're going to interpret these energies that we can't see, these abstract qualities, rather than trying to use tone. I mean, color seems to be the easiest and most applicable for us to understand and grasp. This is also what allows us to measure sound, touch, taste, angle, and shape through their primary resonances with a repetitive color scale. As on a vibratory level, all sensory scales are interchangeable. So what he's saying is we could choose any of these scales that we wish in which to make the ISO standard, right? But for us, color is the easiest because it's probably, it's easier to probably determine that than between tones and so on. But they're all interchangeable. And Russell would even say within the, within the compounds, right? Within the periodic table, we talked about that within the inert gases discussion of how they're all interchangeable. But the standard that we've taken is the color scale because it is probably the most easily understood and most easy to differentiate. In reality, the effects manifested around a circle from the quality of the center are abstract universal, so they're abstract universal energy qualities. So when we look at indigo here, it also goes back to the notes that we talked about, back to the elements that we talked about, back to all these things, taste and so on. We don't really get into taste, but these are all the same thing that have the same resonance and vibration that we can actually interchange, but we're using color as the measurement for the quality. So these are universal energy qualities, which we differentiate through color scale or any other sensory scale based on the configuration of our radiesthetic instrument. At the highest level, these absolute energy qualities, so we have to begin to see there's two energy qualities. We have a relative and an absolute. These absolute energy qualities can be viewed as universal laws. So the absolute can be viewed as universal laws. So the absolute energy qualities, we're going to talk about absolute and relative at the end here, can be viewed as universal laws which manifest throughout all levels of existence. Back to the planes of nature, right? All levels of existence. The effects of those abstract energy qualities in the sensory ranges are perceived as color, sound, touch, taste, and smell. Unperceived effects beyond the sensory ranges affect us all as well on a subconscious level and are measured with radiesthetic instruments calibrated to the color scale. So we can see things, you know, and we can touch things and we can say that's rough, that's smooth, we can say that's bitter, that's sour, but things that are outside our ranges, how do we determine the quality of that? And that is only through these radiesthetic instruments. Any questions before I move on from this discussion of light refraction and that color is what Ibrahim Karim chose as his ISO standard for measurement? All right. So, you know, if we look at this diagram here, the one quality, so, you know, here's the one quality, which is God, which we talked about. This is where the BG3 originates from. And then we have the abstract qualities, which would be the outside circle. So, you know, within Walter Russell's cosmologies, this would be the source, right? The one. And this is what is being radiated out, right? Is to the outside circles, which then begins to make, you know, the abstract universal qualities, which is the red, right? Which is the colors, which is the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, which is the sweet, which is the sour, which is the rough, which is the smooth, which is the pungent, and which is the sweet, right? So all of these, all of our senses are based on a quality, you know. They're based on the quality of, which relates back to the color spectrum or the tonal spectrum or any of these. They're all interchangeable. But this is what Walter Russell would call our sensing body. And what he says is that the sensing body actually deceives us. That we look at the effect, we look at these items, and then we try to make conclusions based on our sensing body. And he says, don't make it on this abstract. Don't make decisions or conclusions on the abstract. Make it on the absolute. Make it based on cause, not effect. Again, we just talked a little bit more about these amplitudes of waves and so on. So to go a step further into the subtle energy qualities of angles, let us look at the energy quality of a wave. We find that the angles of the wave shape changes, transmutations, the quality produced by the wave changes. In biogeometry, we recognize that frequencies can have different energy qualities as in frequencies. One is only taking into account wavelengths. While both wavelength and amplitude are needed in order to view the entire wave shape, the relationship between wavelength and amplitude create the angle of incidence at the wave's central axis, producing the subtle energy qualities of the effect we have on us. The angles produce an energy quality that shapes the higher subtle energy level of the surrounding wave shapes. So again, we're talking the same thing we talked about in the earlier slides, that as this angle here that we have is what is the ratio. It's a proportional quality that makes up the quality of the wave form. And again, this is from, I think, the inert, it might have been from the universe. I think it was actually from the inert gas the inert gases, noble gases discussion we had, where we actually are saying that, helium, fluorine, oxygen, nitrogen actually relate back to these colors, which relate also back to these notes. So again, it's a universal language, all meaning the same thing, but all determined by different instruments. So for taste, it would be the tongue, right? Probably the tongue and the nose, right? Smell is the nose. Touch is the senses. Hearing's the ear, right? Color is the sight. So we have all these different instruments to measure these qualities, but once they get out of our perceptible ranges, then we need different tools to do that. So we're almost to an end here, but as I was looking at Ibrahim's site, I found this diagram, which I had not had in any of my other diagrams that I have in my material. It must have been created after I took the course. But I don't know if everybody remembers this diagram that I created. This is probably 6 months ago, I guess, when we first started doing it, because I was trying to actually understand what he was talking about, what Russell was talking about. And so within Ibrahim's diagram, he has the vibrational range of absolute reality. So within Walter's cosmology, this would be called cause, this would be called source, this would be called God, this would be called the still magnetic light. Out here, the absolute. That then goes into man, who then picks up all this with his sense organs, right, which is limited to specific ranges. Here's the wave, and then we break that down into these color spectrums, just as I've shown here, which also go back into the color, the touch, the sound, the smell, and the taste, right? So the cross application of the laws of one scale can be applied to all scales. They can also be converted to angles, shapes, or polarities. So this is why within biogeometry, we can use angles to actually change and transmute waveforms, because it's a proportion that we're dealing with. On the scale level, the different scales of color, smell, touch, and taste are interchangeable. So these are some of the things that we talked about quite a while ago. So this is what I developed from Walter Russell. This is what Ibrahim developed from biogeometry. They're both very, very similar, right? So now we're going to talk about that absolute and perceived reality. Our senses are the windows of perception. This is what Walter talks about. Everything's being shot against, right, the screen, which we experience a range of frequencies that our organs are sensitive to. So our organs pick up this vibrational frequency. Different species have different sensitivity ranges and perceptive possibilities that best serve their adaptability to the environment and survival skills. They experience a very different reality depending on their sensory range. So, I mean, with that being said, a dog's reality may be different than a human's reality, which may be different than a cat's reality, which may be different than a bat's reality, which may be different than a lion's reality. But this could also pertain to humans that have different levels of sensory perception. So a clairvoyant that may have developed ESP or different sensory perception would have a very different, even though they're still a human, their reality would be much different than the same human who does not have those sensory perceptions. Just as an intuitive would have a much different reality than the person, another human who doesn't have an intuitive development. So based upon the development of the sensory ranges, that can change our perception of the reality. Any questions on that or discussion on that before we move on?
Yeah, so yeah, I'm thinking, yeah, perceived. So I guess if we developed ourselves, sometimes you can come into a room and you can feel the difference, like you can actually feel that it's conducive for good things, I guess.
Mhm.
And then I think we can do things that either by sound or that can clear it out, if you like.
Well, that's why, the Buddhist monks, right? They all chant and om, and
Yeah,
because
this.
because and with that they're actually creating a collective consciousness, right? Which is actually adding to the space. So this is, I believe, that this can be compounded with more people in the same ranges with the same frequencies. We know that there are waves types. We multiply the waves. We multiply, because the more that we have this movement going on, the more the reality is going to change. The more the perception of reality is going to change. And so, Walter Russell says that we create our realities. We are the master creators. We are not victims of anything. We create everything. And so by developing, and by working in different dimensional planes, we can change the perceptions of reality, because the 3D is an illusion. There's only one absolute reality, according to Ibrahim and Walter Russell, which is source. Some people say there's one truth. There is one truth, but we probably don't know it, right? We as humans probably do not know the truth. There is no one on this planet who probably knows the truth. It is all a perceived reality. Unless we can actually get away from our bodies, get away from our sensing. This is what, remember, Walter talked about the mystic, right? That we lose all sense perception, and then we may become into a knowing of absolute truth. But within our realm, the ability to say that we know what truth is. I mean, Jesus said it when they, or I think, no, it wasn't Jesus, it was Pontius Pilate when Jesus was before him, and something about the truth. And, Pilate said, what is the truth, right? In our perceived reality, it's very difficult to say that there is any truth, because we have too many overlays. We have too many preconceived ideas. So our perception of reality is very jaded. So the range of frequencies that we perceive through our sense organs produce nervous impulses that are sent to certain areas in the brain, and they are first transformed through sensory scales into color, sound, touch, smell, and taste. The data from these sense scales interact with the content of the meaning level of the brain or individual data banks of information to form a perceived reality, which is based on the interpretation of a small number of very small ranges from the absolute reality. So again, this is what I was just saying, is that for anyone to say that I know the truth, that I am the truth, that I am a truther, it's my perceived reality, right? It is my perceived reality. To know the absolute truth, we'd have to become disconnected from our sensing body, because we have so many overlays of things we've learned, things we've been taught, things we've experienced, the quality of our senses. I mean, I know that when I was eating, processed foods, my taste was not anywhere what it is now, right? You smoke, you kill your sense of smell. So there's things that we can do that actually, prescription drugs, hurt a lot of our sensing capabilities. And so what Ibrahim's saying here is that we take such a small range of information and try to create a reality or a truth based on this small amount of data. And we say that's the truth, right? Well, that's your truth, right? That's your perceived reality. And maybe we, Doug and me and Brian agree on that perceived reality, but Grant and Giselle and I don't. Who's right? What is the truth, right? Well, it's all based on everyone's perceived reality. There is an absolute truth, but to know that is very difficult. And that's what Walter Russell says. That's where you have to get into the stillness. You got to get into the knowing. You got to listen for that. It may be very abstract, it may be very different than what we're used to knowing. We read books, we want to take perceived reality, parse it down into a written form, and then read that and say, yes, that is the reality. And Ibrahim Karim and Walter Russell both say, no, that's not the reality. That's your perceived reality. But there
Well,
isn't.
they say that the higher form is like a symbol that can say a whole thing, you know? I
Exactly.
mean,
Yeah.
not that I know, but I'm just saying, you know,
Mhm.
there's so much we have to learn that we can, well, by not putting all those realities that we live in today, like, you know, but anyway,
It's actually, there's so much we have to unlearn. Right?
unlearn, yeah, unlearn, I like that.
And begin just to know, right? And begin to just experience this. But to do that, we have to, and this is where we get into meditative techniques and things like that. You know, so the Buddhists were right in a sense, right? Where we have to get to a point to where we become transcendental of our bodies and our sensing. But again, this is to know higher realms and higher truths. We still have to come back to the reality of our physical world and interact with it. So we don't, you know, always want to be in a spiritual plane because we are sent here. We have chosen to come here to do something in a physical space. It's just what direction are we taking? You know, what is the higher thought form that is guiding us to do what we do? Is it our own perceived reality? Or is it the absolute reality? You know, and this is the question that everybody's pondered for, you know, many, 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 many years and generations. So, you know, how, you know, so Ibrahim's created the tools to create quality. He's created the tools to say, you know, understand these different planes of nature, these different planes of existence. But then how do you get to the knowing? Because it's inner work that's actually going to get us to a point to where we can actually begin to actually have this to understand the absolute reality, which is what's out here and which is here, which is God's imagining, which is cause.
I read something recently that when you merge your left and your right hemisphere of your brain, it becomes one that you then have access to, you know, all the energy of the universe.
Well, and when we were taking the course with Dr. Karim, is he said if you just take your two fingers like this and press your tongue to the top of your palate, that you can actually merge your two hemispheres as you meditate.
Wow.
This will actually form a bridge between your two hemispheres.
That's very cool. And
So
they
you-
also said that transcendental meditation does that, but you can't keep it that way though.
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying is that it's very hard to keep, right? And this takes lots and lots of practice. And like I said, I meditate, but I'm not a great. The only time I can really get into some of these states, like I said, is when I do my Wim Hof and actually hold my breath, and I begin to become centered. And I'll have to do that for maybe 30 minutes before I can actually find where I'm sinking into this state. Like it's almost like sinking for me. It's like sinking into this, you know, very velvety, very soft, very cushiony space where I can just sit and you know transcend the sensing body. So and again, I'm no great meditator. I can imagine people who have been doing this for long times and can actually get into these great states. But again, once you receive the message, what are you doing with it? It's not just receiving the message, it's how are we taking that and bringing that into our reality, into our creation, because we came here for a reason. We knew source, right? We were with source before we came. So to come here and just say, all I'm going to do is connect with source, well, you're going to do that when you die. You're going to do that some other time. We've come here for a reason. We've come here for a purpose. We've come here to create. And we come here to sense. But we've come here, you know, from what Walter Russell would say, is we've come here to create what the absolute truth is guiding us to do. Any questions before we move on from this? All right. So the absolute reality is the totality of all vibrational ranges of energies in the universe. Even though we interact with the totality of the ranges of the absolute reality, we are only aware of a minute fraction of it through the limitations set by our senses. There are no colors or sounds in the absolute reality. Remember, this is what Walter Russell said also. It's formless. It's not there, right? This might sound like a bold statement, but it can be better understood using the analogy of a simple experiment. If we let light, which has no color, pass through a glass prism, the light will be reflected at different angles, producing the colors of the spectrum. We showed that in one of the previous slides. The components which are bent at different angles according to their wavelengths are separated and become visible as different colors, each on its own. If we reverse the process and put all colors together, that means every color and its opposite, which are also called complementary, will emerge, and the original colorless whole light will be reproduced. Similarly, if we put all the vibratory ranges of absolute reality together, we get the colorless and soundless everything and nothing that the physicists call energy soup. The absolute reality, again, when we say absolute reality, we say source, is all the energy in every species of being interacts with it through different senses and sense ranges to produce its own perceived reality, through which it can achieve optimal interaction in its physical environment. So each person has their own perceived reality based upon their filters, right? And their sense ranges and their perceptions. But it all comes from source. So it starts out as pure and intentional, right? But then it is parsed as we move into the sensing body, and it's parsed by whatever traumas we may have, right? Whatever, all these, and each person has a different trauma, has a different makeup, has a different body, right? Is everybody's sight the same? No, right? Does everybody have 20/20? Does everybody have 20? No, right? Can everybody taste it? No, there's people who don't even see color, they're colorblind, right? There's people who can't taste certain things. There's people who, can't feel. So not every human is going to have the same sensory perception. Therefore, they're going to have a different reality. So within all this, right, we have, in order to understand how this process works and where the different scales are, we will separate the sense process into several levels of interaction. And again, this is through biogeometry, this is through Ibrahim Karim. The first level at the sense organs, where a specific range of vibration is selected from the total vibratory range of energy that exists within the absolute reality. So, we have the absolute reality, which is source, which is God. So we have everything that's existing there. Each sense organ is designed to select the limited vibratory range with which it interacts. At the second level, the information from the first level of interaction is converted and transferred as electric data along the nerve, right? Leading to a specific area in the brain related to the specific organ. At this second level, the nervous reaction to the information, so where this is being transferred into information, the frequency is being, it's an energy signature that we're identifying as information. Of the different sense organs is the same, either an increase or decrease in the different components of the electrical nervous impulses. No color, sound, smell, taste, or feel is transferred through the nerve. All nerves are the same. They all transfer electrical impulses. This is what Walter Russell says also. Our nerves are just an electrical, they all come through. It's our central processor that begins to parse this information based on our overlays, based on whatever structure we have to interpret that data, right? It's almost like an AI system. Brings in all kinds of data. There's an algorithm that's going to come through there. It's going to parse that data and say, this is what this is. But each algorithm may be different, right? This is kind of the falsity of artificial intelligence, is that the algorithm is really based on some human's perspective of what that data means. The computer or the system doesn't know what it means. It has not, developed what it means. It has taken a programmer's meaning and parses that data and then says, this is what it means. So within us, that's what we have. We are the ones that are parsing that data. So we're an AI in a sense that we're taking this algorithm, which is us, which has all these overlays. And as this sensory perception comes in, we begin to parse it and we begin to create our reality based on that perception. So all nerves are the same. They all transfer electrical impulses, which can carry certain codes of information, archetypes, whatever we're talking about, right? This could be these, as Jung talks about archetypes, these codes as a result of the reaction to the energy received by these sense organs. So that's the second level. Now we're going to jump to the fifth level. In the fifth level, this perceived reality is projected outside onto its respective areas of absolute reality. So this is where we're talking, and just as Russell talked about the cinematographic projection, right? We're projecting our reality onto the screen of space or the screen of the Akasha. So each person is projecting their perceived reality as the source information comes in and is then parsed by our algorithms through our sensing organs, and then is projected back out as a perceived reality. So it's projected outside onto its respective areas of absolute reality. This also applies to time and space, which is created by our reality. So again, there's absolute, there's perceived, and there's ours. So each person has a unique perceived reality and differs from other time-space configurations of other species or other dimensions. So other species and other dimensions may have a different idea of time and space. That's why we might not be able to see them. That's why, we don't have sensory perceptions. They may be in different time intervals. I mean, they may be going really fast and we just can't see them, right? They're just so, or they may be going really slow and it's just like a stagnant thing to us. I don't know, but they are in a different time space reality. For example, time seems to run at different speeds and space follows different laws than in our waking state, right? So when we're asleep, we're in a different plane of existence, right? We're in our astral body, as they say, right? And we have a different time configuration for that. Time, space concepts of every organism differ according to its environment. The third level, this is what, we're getting back now to the third level. So we've gone from the first, the second to the fifth. The third level is where our nervous reaction is evaluated according to a qualitative scale of color, sound, smell, taste, or touch. This is where the same type of nervous impulse from the second level is translated into a diversity of perceptions. In the third level, the translation is abstract. So it's not absolute. At this third level, it is abstract. Objective to all human beings, because they all have a similar anatomy. On that level, these scales do not only indicate qualitatively the level of increase or decrease different aspects of electrical nervous impulses, but also other quantitative aspects of quality of nature. All right, qualitative nature. We actually do not perceive the qualitative aspects of those scales of perception. We perceive in color red, the sound note C, or do, or the taste sweet, etc., certain qualities and not quantities. Right? So, it may taste sour to me and it tastes sour to Doug, but Doug says, that tastes horrible. I said, I love that because I like sour, right? I like dill pickles. He may not. He may like cake, right? He may like sweet. I might say, oh, that tastes horrible. That's sweet. That is my qualitative perception, right? That is my qualitative perception of the same input. So we don't do quantities, we do qualities. That is why we refer to them as qualitative scales of measurement. The measure of quality is linear, and when applied to vibration, it would be a measure of the speed of movement that we call frequency, and measured in hertz. So again, we're talking quantity here, right? So we can measure quantity with electrical instruments. We can measure the quality is linear, and when applied to it would be a measure of speed. So we can measure the hertz of something, right, with an electrical device. We can measure quantities. Speed of the movement that we call frequency and measure in hertz units. The possibilities of our scientific instruments put the limits to what we can measure at both ends of the scale, the very big or the very big, the very small or the very big. The present level of technology will therefore always limit our traditional scientific worldview. The third level of sense perception is an abstract, objective, qualitative measure according to the scales of color, sound, taste, and touch. There is no meaning yet on this level. It is just an abstract transformation to the scales. So what Ibrahim's saying here, right, is that as this source, right, as the absolute comes in, our organs, our sensory perception, our body, right, this physical form begins to translate that, but it has not put any meaning to it yet. It is just color, right? It is just a qualitative measurement. Once that then gets transferred, right? So then we go to the fourth level. The fourth level of perception is the meaning level of perception. So once we take these qualitative, once the source is broken up into, in computer science we call it into packets, right? Packets of data, right? Once this is then broken up into these packets of data, which we call the color scale, we could call it the vibratory scale, we call it, all different kinds of scales. But once it's broken up, then it will go into our meaning level. Then it will go into the algo, right? Once the machine breaks up the data packets, then the algo is going to parse it now. Okay. So the different types of information. So at the fourth level of perception is the meaning level of perception. In the brain, all the different types of information from the different scales of perception are again put together and correlated with memory content of the brain, right? Traumas, whatever we have, whatever we've learned, this is our overlays. So it comes into our brains, it's parsed. The algo comes in, and what's the algo? The algorithm is just a memory of whatever the programmer put in, right? With his traumas and whatever. So that's why artificial intelligence is a false, it's never going to be a god, right? Because it's really just based on human perceptions. With memory content of the brain over ever expanding personal data banks to produce the final form of perceived reality as we know it. This is the meaning level that puts our space-time awareness into the perceived reality. It is actually through the addition of meaning to the results of the scales that the perceived reality is put together. So we all have the same data coming in. It's all absolute. Most of our organs are going to parse that information in the same way because our organs are very similar for the human. But once it goes into the meaning level, into the fourth level, then that is going to be parsed differently. It's going to be interpreted, that is going to have a different interpreter, right? It's going to have a different interface for each person based upon their meanings. And then that will project that perceived reality.
And what about like the, like the thoughts that's in the ether of everyone that ever thought anything?
Well, again, those usually will come after the perceived reality or a spoken word. So, a lot of this is, again, we're talking about creation and transmutation, right?
Yeah.
So this is the creation process that we're talking about right now, right? We're bringing this in and we're putting it out. We're putting out the wave. So we're put out a negative thought form, right? A negative wave thought form. I hate you. I want to kill you, whatever that is, right? What is the wave on the other side that can transmute that? So yeah, all those waves are out there, but they've already been created. This is the creation process. Now we can take those in and transmute them, right? We can take them back in because waveforms never die, right? This is the Akasha, right? All things stay. They are all out there. They all are continuously out there. I mean, they often talk about, I think when you listen to Dark Journalist, he talked about Lindbergh as he was flying across, he's doing the circling the globe or whatever, that he encountered these spirits of the air, these thoughts, these voices. In the Bible, it talks about, in the age of Aquarius, this is the age of principalities of darkness and of the air, right? There are so many thought forms out there. There's geists out there, ghosts, what we'd call ghosts, or geists of ideas and concepts that have been put out there that don't go away. They might be forgotten, but they're still out there until someone actually develops a thought form. And, it's like with the anthroposophy. it was there it was in, you know, in the 1920s, we have anthroposophy. We had all these things going on. They may have been forgotten, but they didn't go away, right? And now they're being rekindled. So they're being rejuvenated as we become more aware and begin to perceive and begin to pick up on these thought and waveforms. Did that answer your question, Doug?
I think so.
Okay. Any other questions about the fourth level? 'Cause I have a diagram next, which is actually going to show this more. Go ahead.
Yeah, I have a question about the scope of the projection.
Mhm.
Like what, I mean, it sounds like what we're speaking of as what we project is ultimately everything then that we perceive as physical reality.
Mhm.
Am I on the right track there?
You are on the right track there.
So my body is also part of physical reality. The cells that make up the sensory, the things that would interpret sense. And so my body has to be present before I can create my, before I can project through that interpretation through the senses.
Correct. In this 3D reality. If you're talking about the 3D reality, when you're talking about the other, you know, realities, the other planes of existence, those would be the different other bodies. So within the 3D realm, what you're talking about, it's your physical body. But you have you have other body types than just a physical body that you're speaking about now. And
other sensory types as well.
Correct. Some may not be developed, you know. And once you develop those other sensory types, you will actually view the body differently. Because what Walter Russell says, we think this is us. This is not us. This body is not me. You know, I think Bear and Mike actually call it, like, you know, it's our spacesuit, right? It's this, what we've created. It's more like a probe, you know. We're like a Earth probe. Our body's like an Earth probe that has all our little sensing, you know. Think about it as a rover, right? We're actually in command station somewhere, but we've sent our Earth probe down here, right, to create, to sense, to do all these things in the 3D realm.
And we create the probe as we go too.
Correct. Yeah, and it's where you put your intention. So what you have to understand is, you may think that, you know, you understand where Europe is and the moon, but these are all things that they only are created when you put your intention upon it. The minute your intention leaves, you know, this is what, you know, we talked about the quantum physics, the current concepts is, once your attention goes away, it disappears.
It's like the tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it concept.
Yeah, until we put our attention on it, it is not manifested in reality. And once we take our attention off it, it goes away. This is the idea of this, you know, slit experiment and so on. Did that answer your question? I am.
Well, I don't know if I really had a question.
Okay.
I was sort of I kind of had an issue with the logic there. And since you're pointing out multidimensionality and different bodies in different planes, now I'm kind of just going back to what my initial thought was there too. So I'm going to just leave it at that.
Okay. Okay. All right. So we're going to go into a next slide here, which is kind of showing, you know, the diagram of this whole thing that we've talked about. So, and I just wanted to touch about, you know, beyond the genius is the mystic. This is what Walter Russell said. This is what we covered. I think the mystic is the one who has attained cosmic consciousness by a complete severance of the seats of consciousness and sensation. He is then almost totally unaware of his body and is totally aware of the light of God centering him. So this is as we're talking about, right? As we get out of this, as we become the mystic, right? As we get out of judging everything by our sensory perceptions, we then can begin to concentrate on the one light of source and actually deal with absolute reality and not be so focused on effect of the perceived reality. So within that, we have the absolute reality, right? We have the level 1, which is the sense organs. This is just kind of a diagram of all the things that we just talked about, the different levels, right? So we have level 2 is the qualitative nerve coded reaction, right? Level 3 is the qualitative scale of color, sound, smell, and touch, right? And then this level 4 is our data bank, right? This is where it goes into the, the correlation of the definitions. This is where it attaches to the dictionary. This is where it attaches to whatever we have, in the program that relates this back to meaning, right? This is where we have all those things at in the program, right? Then we have once we kind of get into the consciousness, then we may, actually have a different meaning level, right? This may actually say, okay, well, this is a woman, and so forth. Oh, that's a bad woman, right? This may be where you actually put on our different levels of meaning of good, bad, different, things like that. Then we have the formation of the inner reality. Okay, this is what it is. I got it. Boom. Then we project that out. So this is very similar to the radiation and the gravitation that Walter Russell talks about also, right? That we create these things, they come in and they go out. They come in, they go back, they return to source, right? Within the 3D reality. So in physical radiesthesia, we are measuring the quality of interaction of the 3rd level. So this is where we're at. This is what the radiesthesia is doing in the physical. It's at this level that we're just measuring those color qualities as they're broken up. So we're not attaching any conscious, meaning to what we're seeing. We're just saying this is what it is. These are the qualities. These are the qualities at their absolute parsed level. So as that comes in from the absolute, is parsed and divided into the separate package of pure information, that's where biogeometry measures. So, within this, we have the sense scale, objective, subjective, right? So at this point here, this is the objective and subjective, and then it goes totally into the subjective. So every piece of information has an emotional part and a mental part. So once this information comes in, we then begin to attach our emotional bodies, our emotional parsing, and our mental parsing to actually make an outcome of that. So as Walter Russell said on page 53, all of our pulsing universe is but one extension of the one still light of universal mind, projected through positive and negative light upon a screen of space. So as all this is what Walter Russell, this is Ibrahim's drawing here, not Walter's. But he's saying the same thing, that all this comes in from one source and then is projected back out on the screen of space. So in physical radiesthesia, we are measuring the quality of interaction at the 3rd level, which is before the meaning level, which is usually colored by our different data banks. And when he says colored, he probably should might use different words that kind of may confuse you about the color spectrum, but it really means it's tainted, right? It's influenced, right? It's influenced by our different data banks, our traumas, our ideas, our thought, our beliefs, whatever that is, right? Our memories. We apply the color or polarity scales to all levels of vibration inside or outside the boundaries of our perception to become a universal scale of quality measurement. The universal application of the polarity scale to all vibratory levels is more understandable, as everything is energy. Everything is energy, and energy is vibration, and vibration is the interplay of positive and negative polarities. Now, what Walter would say that everything is light, but everything is energy because it is a wave, and a wave has a form, and the form is an energy. But one can easily substitute the color red for positive polarity. Same thing Walter says, right? Red is positive, red is male, red is hot, right? And blue or violet for negative polarity. Again, blue is female, blue is negative, blue is radiation. Exact same thing. Or red for increasing and blue for decreasing, right? One is gravitational, one is radiation, one is centripetal, one is centrifugal. We've gone through all this with Walter Russell. If you haven't seen that in the previous discussions, I'd go back and look at some of the Walter Russell energy functions. By using these scales in a universal way, one can access realms beyond the limits of quantitative science. However, in a qualitative way, the qualitative way makes possible the interaction with all existing levels of energy in nature, which include the physical, vital, emotional, mental, and spiritual levels in an abstract way. The linear characteristics of quantitative measurement, which is bound by time and space, give ways to the nonlinear qualitative measures that have no time or space boundaries. So we're on the last slide here, and we can go. We're still almost at our 2-hour mark, so let's just finish this up real quick. So biogeometry and the concept of energy balancing. In the physics of quality, the scales used, whether color, musical notes, or other, are just one part of the assessment. An energy system, whether animate or inanimate, is a living entity. So whether it's a rock or a tree, it is a living entity. Okay, it doesn't have to be moving. It can be animate or inanimate. Is a living that has a pattern of arrangement in which the qualities take their place to produce the final unity and harmony of the energy system. Just like a pattern of arrangement is used in placing musical notes in a sequence with specific intervals gives the final composition that we perceive as music. Another example is the geometrical patterns of a molecule to which the atoms are arranged. So with all this, I mean, we're basically at the thing that in the, from what Walter Russell says, that in the wave lies the secret of creation. But I would also put myself is, and also transmutation. So any questions before we wrap it up for the day? Hopefully that kind of put a lot more things in perspective after all of this. Any questions before we leave or wrap it up? All righty then. So with that being said, this is Will Harold, the Energy Hunter, with Akashic Intelligence, the original AI, and the Secret of Light group, coming to you from the Rogue River in Southern Oregon. Thank you so much. Please like and subscribe, and leave any comments about what we talked about today. They're always appreciated.